Throughout the history of warfare, there have been countless reports of thousands of incidents in which soldiers have been killed unintentionally by their own comrades or friendly troops during combat, but also innocent civilians who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. In German, this is called Eigenbeschuss, but for quite some time now, the English term friendly fire has become widely used. Estimates suggest that between 2 and 20% of all combat casualties are the result of friendly fire, with the statistical frequency remaining relatively constant over the last 200 years, when taking into account the number of troops deployed in combat. However, when a soldier is deliberately killed by a comrade or a superior by a subordinate in war, which is tantamount to murder, the English word fragging is used, meaning to shatter. This term first emerged during the increased United States involvement in the Vietnam War from 1964 onwards, when unpopular superiors were killed at night, or during an attack by a fragmentation grenade thrown into a tent or a foxhole. Afterwards, it was claimed that the victim had been killed by enemy fire. The use of hand grenades was also motivated by the fact that they left no fingerprints and could not be ballistically tested to identify the perpetrator. During the Vietnam War, there were allegedly 800 confirmed incidents of fragging in the Army and the United States Marine Corps. Friendly fire affected both soldiers and civilians, regardless of rank, age, or gender. The Englishman Simon Webb reports that in 1940, during the Battle of Britain, a significant number of his compatriots were killed by friendly fire from their own heavy artillery, which had been deployed in the cities to combat German aircraft in the absence of anti-aircraft guns, whereby it is logically impossible to hit a fast-moving aircraft with a fired artillery shell. However, countless shells had faulty timing mechanisms and did not detonate at an altitude of 3,000 meters, but fell on the cities. An expert at the Cavendish Laboratory, the elite University of Cambridge, estimated that half of the English shells exploded near the ground and killed as many people as the German bombs. If this is true, the British Army and its artillery would have been responsible for over 25,000 deaths in Great Britain during the Second World War. This figure may well be accurate, as the number of casualties caused by anti-aircraft fire was widely known in Britain at the time and, despite censorship, was repeatedly reported in detail in both national and regional newspapers. So, on the 1930th of March, 1944 in the Western Mail, anti-aircraft shells, one of which exploded in a crowded factory, killing 12 people, including 7 women, and injuring many others, were the main cause of damage during defensive measures over the coastal area of South Wales on Monday. To illustrate the tragic consequences of friendly fire, here are a few examples from the last 2 years of the Second World War. After Lieutenant General Karl Eibel, who was originally from Austria, was entrusted with the command of the 24th Panzer Corps on February 20, 1943, he undertook a reconnaissance trip to the front during the chaotic German retreat northwest of Stalingrad on February 21. When he encountered soldiers from a division of the Italian Alpine Corps in a heavy snowstorm, they mistook his command vehicle for a Soviet armored car and attacked it with hand grenades. General Eibel was so badly wounded in his left leg that he died a few hours later at the dressing station. This meant that the Corps had lost its 4th commanding general within 4 months. On the 3rd of October, 1942, General Willibald von Langermann und Erlenkamp of the Panzer Division was killed by artillery fire during a reconnaissance mission to the front near Storochervoye. His successor, General of the Artillery Martin Wandel, is considered missing after the near-total destruction of the 24th Panzer Corps in the Soviet Ostrogozhsk-Rossosh operation in January 1943. Then, on January 20th, 1943, Lieutenant General Arno Jahr was temporarily assigned to command the remnants of the Corps, but due to the desperate situation, he took his own life with a pistol shot just 1 day later. And again, the following day, his successor, General of the Infantry Karl Eibel, was killed by so-called friendly fire from Italian mountain troops. Or let's go to the night of the 16th to the 17th of May, 1943, when, in Operation Chastise, 19 Lancaster bombers of the British 617th Bomber Squadron under Wing Commander Lieutenant Colonel Guy Penrose Gibson attacked and destroyed the dams of 6 reservoirs with specially developed rolling mines, causing catastrophic flooding in the Ruhr area and in the villages in the Eder Valley when the Möhne and Edersee dams broke. At least 1,650 people were killed, including 1,026 foreign prisoners of war, civilian workers from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, as well as forced laborers, mostly from the Soviet Union, in various camps below the reservoirs. In the town of Neheim alone, at the confluence of the Möhne and Ruhr rivers, over 800 people were killed, including at least 493 Russian forced laborers. During the operation, some of the attacking aircraft were shot down by anti-aircraft fire, killing 53 of the 133 British soldiers involved. The military value of the operation, in which mainly foreign prisoners of war and female forced laborers were killed by so-called friendly fire, was so controversial within the British leadership that even the ruthless British Air Marshal Arthur Harris, who had led the Royal Air Force in bombing numerous German cities, killing hundreds of thousands of people, rejected the plan, saying that it was nothing more than a spectacular stunt. When, on the 28th of January 1944, a Wehrmacht train carrying around 800 American, British, and South African prisoners of war on their way to a German prison camp crossed a bridge on the Ponte Paglia in Alerona, Italy, it was bombed by a formation of B-26 bombers from the 320th Bombardment Group. While many of the prisoners were able to escape, around 400 were killed, their mass graves in the town later destroyed by further bombing. After the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, Operation Cobra, which lasted from July 25th to August 4th, marked the breakout from the Normandy bridgehead. To support this, hundreds of bombers from the 8th United States Air Force were used. On June 24th as well, the bombers were supposed to bomb the German positions, but the bad weather made proper target identification impossible. And although a number of missions had been stopped and several squadron leaders had refused to bomb without proper identification, 350 B-24 and B-17 flying fortresses took off and hit both the Allied airfield A-5 at Schiphol and parts of the 30th United States Infantry Division, killing 25 American soldiers and wounding 131. When the weather cleared up the next day, the 9th Air Force was supposed to attack. But although the Commander-in-Chief of the 1st United States Army, General Omar Bradley, had ordered the planning officers of the United States Army Air Force, which was still under the Army until 1947, to bomb the German lines from east to west to make a possible Wehrmacht retreat more difficult, the leadership of the United States Air Force had their medium bombers attack from north to south, directly over the Allied positions. The result of this friendly fire was 490 wounded and 111 dead GIs, including, during an inspection of a battalion of the 120th Infantry Regiment near St. Lo, the important Lieutenant General Leslie McNair for the United States commander of the several million-strong base of forces. With that, General Leslie McNair became the highest-ranking American victim of friendly fire in World War II, and the 30th United States Infantry Division lost 700 men in 2 days as a result. 5 months later, during the German Ardennes offensive that began on December 16th, 1944, a Canadian artillery unit deployed to support the retreating United States regiments mistook a United States unit for German soldiers and fired on them. 76 American soldiers were killed and 138 were wounded. When, on the 1st of January, around 850 German fighters and fighter bombers flew a surprise attack on Allied airfields in the Netherlands, Belgium, and France in Operation Bodenplatte, 292 aircraft were lost. 213 pilots were killed or captured after being shot down, and 18 pilots were wounded. Between 30 and 35 enemy aircraft were shot down by German anti-aircraft guns on the outward and return flights, but there may have been considerably more. Among the German losses were 3 wing commanders, 5 group commanders, and 14 squadron leaders. It was the Luftwaffe's greatest loss of life in a single day, caused in part by friendly fire. On the 3rd of March 1945, while searching for a launch pad for V-2 rockets, the Royal Air Force bombed the densely populated suburb of Bezuidenhout in The Hague, Holland, due to a navigation error. The bombardment caused great destruction in the region. 511 people were killed, 344 were injured, and 30,000 lost their homes. On April 14, 1945, shortly before the end of the war, 2 German submarines were on their way to Norway. U-1272 under Oberleutnant Zursee Hans Schotteborg and U-235 under Kapitänleutnant der Reserve Friedrich Husken. In the Kattegat, northwest of Skagenshoorn, Denmark, they encountered a German convoy at submerged depth, consisting of the destroyer Friedrich Eaton, the railway ferry Preußen, and the torpedo boat T-17. While U-1272 had dived deeper, U-235 surfaced, perhaps to identify itself. But when it immediately submerged again, and the destroyer mistook the water swirl from the periscope for a torpedo's trajectory, T-17 dropped a series of depth charges, one of which hit the submarine directly. However, the crew of T-17 quickly lost their enthusiasm over the supposed success when a dead officer from the submarine was washed to the surface. All 48 men of U-235 fell victim to friendly fire 3 weeks before the end of the war. Then, 5 days before the German surrender, on the 3rd of May 1945, what is probably the worst and most tragic case of friendly fire in history took place. The senseless and unnecessary sinking of 3 German ships in Lübeck Bay, the large passenger ship Cap Arcona, the cargo ship Thielbeck, and the steamship Deutschland. On that Thursday, several squadrons of the 83rd Air Force Group under Colonel Thomas Trail in the 2nd British Tactical Air Force led by Air Marshal Sir Arthur Cunningham carried out 4 separate but synchronized attacks, damaging a total of 115 ships with bombs, rockets, and cannons, sinking 23 ships, including the Cap Arcona and Thielbeck, at around 3 p.m. In the process, over 7,000 people were either burned, drowned, or shot in the water by the Royal Air Force pilots. Here is Royal Air Force pilot Alan Wise from the 193rd Squadron. We used our onboard cannons against the guys in the water and shot them down with 20mm guns. Terrible thing, but we were told to do it, and we did it. That's war. However, contrary to the British hopes, these were not German soldiers, but 6,400 concentration camp prisoners from 15 countries, including Russia and the Allies, as well as around 100 Jews, who had been brought to the ship from the Neuengamme concentration camp in Hamburg. It can be assumed that these survivors of the concentration camp atrocities were to be brought to freedom in Sweden in so-called white buses, as had already happened in April with almost 6,000 prisoners from the Neuengamme camp, in accordance with an agreement between SS Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler and the vice president of the Swedish Red Cross and cousin of the king in Stockholm, Count Volker Bernadotte, be brought to freedom in Sweden on ships in so-called white buses, as had already happened in April with almost 6,000 prisoners from the Neuengamme camp. It is hard to believe, but with the release of concentration camp prisoners and prisoners of war, the SS leadership actually hoped to obtain better conditions in armistice negotiations with the Western Allies. After the sinking of the overcrowded ships, the Royal Air Force later made apologetic statements, saying that the British pilots had not known about the prisoners of war and concentration camp survivors on the ships. However, published British documents from the 1970s indicate that the Swedish government had informed the Royal Air Force about this before the attack. The British military leadership had also received information from the Lubeck Red Cross delegation on the evening of the second attack that there were prisoners on board the Cap Arcona. And even during the first attack, clearly visible white flags had already been raised. And during the shelling, German sailors and many prisoners waved white tablecloths and bed sheets out of the portholes. The Royal Air Force records about the attacks on the ships are classified until 2045. Instead, the Royal Air Force only generally refers to its operational goal at the time, which was to prevent Wehrmacht and SS staff from retreating to Norway, which was not yet occupied by Allied troops, through the attack on the ships in Lubeck Bay known as the Big Shipping Strike. However, this does not correspond to the facts. And even the peace of the thousands who had drowned and were still lying in the hold of the Cap Arcona was not respected. During a training exercise after the end of the war, British units set it on fire again. In the 50s, the Cap Arcona and Thielbeck were cut up for scrap. At the former anchorages of the Cap Arcona and Thielbeck, the skeletal remains of 3,000 unburied victims still lie at a depth of 17 meters. In many places in Schleswig-Holstein, graves and memorials commemorate the thousands of victims who hoped to escape the horrors of the concentration camps, only to suffer a cruel death from friendly fire. Finally, there is the relatively unknown story of a fierce air battle between American and Soviet aircraft, which was kept completely secret in both the Soviet Union and the United States for a long time. It took place on Tuesday, November 7, 1944, and was first mentioned in 1963 during the political thaw under Nikita Khrushchev in the book by the former commander of the 37th Army, General Sergei Semyonovich Biryusov. Although he, like everyone else who wrote about it later, had not been there, he could still remember it. The location was the airspace over the city of Nice in southern Yugoslavia. A little more than 2 weeks earlier, on October 20th, the Red Army, supported by partisan groups, had driven the Wehrmacht out of Belgrade and was now focusing on the capture of Budapest. Also on the marching routes was the 6th Soviet Guards Rifle Corps. According to the Gregorian calendar, this 7th of November was the 27th anniversary of the October Revolution of 1917. Many tanks and trucks were decorated with red flags and propaganda banners. A band was playing in the middle of the column. But suddenly, the music was drowned out by the roar of engines from numerous airplanes, which at first glance appeared to be German reconnaissance planes of the Focke-Wulf FW-189 type. Panic broke out, but it disappeared just as quickly, because those weren't German Focke-Wulf 189s, but rather heavily armed American fighter bombers of the P-38 Lightning type, marked with the white stars of the United States Air Force. But then something unexpected happened, because as soon as the Americans were over the column, they opened fire with their four 12.7mm machine guns, the 20mm cannon, and 127mm rockets. While the Soviet soldiers were seeking cover, they desperately waved their red flags, but the attack continued unabated. That was the beginning of the American-Soviet air battle over the city of Nice. On this 7th of November, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter bombers of the 95th, 96th, and 97th Fighter Squadrons of the 82nd Fighter Group under Colonel Clarence T. Edwinson were tasked with attacking German railway transports and motorized columns of the mainly Austrian 297th Infantry Division under General Oberst Albrecht Bayer between Sienica and Mitrovica. When the P-38s arrived in the area of Nice, they spotted the long vehicle column of the 6th Guards Rifle Corps, which was moving from Nice toward Belgrade. He immediately attacked the first squadron, destroying several vehicles, wounding 37 Soviet soldiers and killing 31, including the commander of the 6th Guards Rifle Corps, Lieutenant General Grigory Petrovich Kotov. While the 2nd Squadron of P-38s was now preparing to attack, the commander of the 17th Soviet Air Army, Colonel General of Aviation Vladimir Alexandrovich Sudech, who was at that time at the Inis Air Base and could see and hear the attack, gave the order for a scramble to the 866th Fighter Regiment in the 288th Fighter Division. However, Sudech had also initially assumed that the attackers were Focke-Wulf 189s of the Luftwaffe. When the first Soviet Yakolev Yak-9 fighter planes approached the American aircraft, they immediately opened fire despite the large red stars on the Soviet planes and shot down a Yak-9. Then they climbed to about 500 meters and circled over Nice. Shortly afterwards, a 2nd Squadron of Jacks, which had taken off from another air base near Nice, arrived in the airspace above Nice, led by Soviet ace pilot Captain Alexander Koldenov. Then, in the next 15 minutes, the air was filled with machine gun and cannon fire from the new Soviet Yaks and an unidentified number of American P-38s. Now, here is the entry from the war diary of the 866th Fighter Aviation Regiment. On the 7th of November, 1944, at 12:50 Moscow time, a group of 12 Lightning aircraft carried out a ground attack on units of the Rifle Corps of the 3rd Ukrainian Front. They were moving westward along the road from Nice in the Commerlilia area. 4 P-38s flew in formation for the first attack. After that, the anti-aircraft guns at Nice airfield opened fire and shot down a P-38, which crashed 1 kilometer north of the airfield. A note from me, it was United States Captain Charles King from the 96th Squadron, who had been rescued near Sienica by farmers and Chetnik partisans. The war diary continues, stating that at 1 o'clock, 2 fighters from the 866th Fighter Regiment took off, at 1056 more, and at 1:10 another 2. After that, the war diary describes details of the air battle, including the shooting down of 2 P-38s. However, if you compare the written reports of the 866th Fighter Regiment with those of the 288th Fighter Division, they sometimes differ significantly from each other. In the report prepared a little later by the Air Division, it says that the aforementioned Captain Koldenov ended the air battle by flying toward the first P-38s while waggling his wings, until the Americans recognized the red stars on his aircraft. However, he reported 18 P-38s, although there were only 12. He claimed to have shot down 3 of them. Regarding the air battle itself, the War Diary of the 288th Division reports that 10 tried not to protect the airfield, with 2 being shot down, 1 pilot killed, and the other taken to the hospital with severe burns. A third Jag-9, which had pursued a P-38, was shot down by its own anti-aircraft fire, and the pilot was killed. In contrast, the War Diary of the 17th Air Army states that the air battle took place between 8 Jag-9s and 18 Lightningen, with the 866th Fighter Regiment reporting that it had shot down 3 P-38s and damaged 3 more. In reality, however, only 2 P-38s were probably shot down, with the 2 American lieutenants from the 95th Squadron, Philip Brewer and Eldon R. Colson, having been killed. On the Soviet side, a total of 33 soldiers were killed, including the commander of the 6th Guards Rifle Corps, Lieutenant General Grigory Petrovich Kotov, and 39 were wounded. 20 trucks were destroyed. However, the commander responsible for the attack, Colonel Clarence T. Edwinson of the 82nd United States Fighter Air Group stationed in Foggia, Italy, did not report the incident to his superiors, but instead went on holiday. But then, 3 days later, on November 10th, the Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Red Army, General Alexei Antonov, informed the head of the American military mission in Moscow, Major General John R. Dean, about the incident, and in his report mentioned 27 P-38s. Now, this air battle could have triggered major political complications and significantly heightened the already latent tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. However, in order not to provide ammunition for German propaganda, both sides had agreed to remain silent about the incident. However, the United States Air Force immediately apologized to the Soviet Union and launched an investigation, with the first result being the removal of the commander of the 82nd Fighter Group, Colonel Edwinson, and his rapid transfer back to the United States A, where he was assigned as Deputy Airfield Commander at the Fighter School at Blumenthal Field in North Carolina. He later became a brigadier general. After further investigations, the United States Air Force informed the Soviet side that the original plan was for the P-38s to attack German troop concentrations near the city of Novi Pazar. But due to a navigation error, one group accidentally flew 100 kilometers to the east, where they encountered the column of the 6th Guards Rifle Corps over Nish and mistook them for a Wehrmacht unit. However, since the 2nd Squadron had also attacked while in radio contact with the 1st, the Soviet side doubted the veracity of the American statement. However, the Red Army had not informed Colonel Edwinson at the Foggia Air Base that the Russian ground troops had already advanced almost 100 kilometers between November 6th and 7th. When the P-83s attacked at high speed, their unintentional attack was due to both the lack of communication and the similarity between German and Russian steel helmets from the air, as well as the camouflage color of the vehicles. As a consequence of the air battle, a border was established between the two allies on November 26th, within which their aircraft could operate separately in order to eliminate a repeat encounter. On December 14th, the official American apology was delivered by the ambassador to the Soviet Union, Avril Harriman. This rather unique incident of friendly fire shows how widely explanations differ, especially after the American-Soviet alliance gave way to hostility. Because after the start of the Cold War, the Soviet side now claimed that the air battle had been a provocative, treacherous air attack by the Allies. It is undisputed that both United States squadrons broke off their attacks at the moment they were close enough to see the red stars on the Yaks. But there are also some strange witness statements. For example, the airfield engineer from Nice, Dragoslav Dimish, claimed that the American attack was carried out by about 30 aircraft, including B-25 Mitchell bombers. And another witness to the battle, the Yugoslav partisan leader Joko Drecin, allegedly counted 7 downed American planes, 5 P-38 Lightnings, and 2 B-25 Mitchell bombers, and 14 fallen American soldiers. After the era of glasnost under Mikhail Gorbachev came to an end, starting from the 2010s, the Russian government recalled the incident and described it as a deliberate American attack. In 2015, a monument designed by Russia was unveiled in Niš to commemorate the Soviet soldiers killed in the incident. What actually happened on November 7, 1944, in the airspace over Niš is still disputed, as Yugoslavia, Russia, and the United States all provide different accounts of the battle. The exact reasons for the attack, as well as the actual outcomes and losses. And as with many other controversial events in the Second World War, the security classification remains top secret for all those involved.